Hello, and welcome to Reimagining Love. I'm Dr. Alexandra Solomon. I have been studying relationships for over 20 years as a couples therapist, a professor, an award-winning author, and as a wife, mother, daughter, sister, and friend. Now, I'm inviting you into this space each week as I dig into some of the toughest and most fascinating relational dilemmas of our time. If you want to discover how to create vibrant and loving relationships in your own life, you have come to the right place. This is Reimagining Love. Hi there. Welcome back to Reimagining Love. Our guest today perhaps needs no introduction. She is beloved by all of the therapists of the land for her research on the benefits of self-compassion, which really, truly is always among the interventions that I suggest when we're dealing with the deep, difficult relationship stuff and the emotions that arise in the wake of it, whether that's shame or overwhelm or loneliness, any and all of the difficult emotions we experience in life. Self-compassion is a tool that we can bust out anytime and a tool that requires no prerequisites. And this wonderful woman was instrumental in bringing it to the masses. I am, of course, speaking about Dr. Kristin Neff. Dr. Kristen Neff is a pioneer in the field of self-compassion research, conducting the first empirical studies more than 20 years ago. She runs the Self-Compassion Community, an online learning platform where people can learn the skills of self-compassion with the help and support of others. She's the author of the best-selling books, Self-Compassion and Fierce Self-Compassion. And along with her colleague, Chris Germer, she developed the empirically supported Mindful Self-Compassion program and co-founded the Center for Mindful Self-Compassion. Today, Dr. Kristen Neff takes us through a little crash course in self-compassion, starting with outlining the 3 pillars of self-compassion. We discuss the influence of both biology and our family of origin on that self-critical part of us and how self-compassion is the salve to that inner critic. We discuss some myths about self-compassion. We talk about the grief that can arise when we begin a self-compassion practice. And we get into the topic of fierce self-compassion, which is another branch of self-compassion that Dr. Kristin Neff wrote about in her book called Fierce Self-Compassion, and how we can lean into this more action-oriented facet to help us be ambitious and fulfill our life's purpose. And of course, we spent time talking about the impact of self-compassion on the dynamics of our intimate relationships. Spoiler alert, practicing self-compassion improves our intimate relationships, and that is scientifically proven. I am a huge fan of Dr. Kristin Neff's work and have been for a long time, so I was thrilled to have a chance to sit down with her for this conversation. I know you're going to get so much out of it. Enjoy. Kristen, thank you for taking the time to be here today.
Thanks for having me. I'm very happy to be here, Alexandra.
My first question for you is, do you get how beloved you are by the therapists of the land? Like, what an enormous fan base you have with all of us who are in the trenches day in and day out with the individuals and the couples and the family, like how really trusted and beloved you are. Do you get that?
Well, I do now.
Okay.
Thank you. That's very sweet. That's nice to know. Yeah.
Oh, it's so true. There's so often when researchers work, stays kind of in the ivory tower, but you have made your research, which is now, it's not just you who did these 5,000 studies, but the empirical findings around self-compassion are 5,000 studies deep. And you have been right there translating it and making sure that we can pick it up from your lab and bring it into our offices. And that is crucial.
Yeah. I'm so glad because to me, the research at this point, we already know it works. It's kind of, at this point, it really matters how to help people be more self-compassionate. That's what I care about.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So before we dive in and I make us nerd out on all things self-compassion, I want to ask you the question that I ask all of the guests. So are you ready?
Okay.
Okay. Kristen, how are you reimagining love in one of your important relationships these days?
Well, so I'm going to give you an honest answer,
I love it.
which is that I am single and I am, it'd be nice to find a partner. But given that I don't have a lot of control over that, I've really been reimagining this idea of what is it that, what do I need to feel loved, to feel special, value, beautiful, all those things, company, all those things we usually look for in someone else. And every time I have that thought, like, oh, I wish I met someone, or that those yearnings come up, I've been actually making a conscious practice to turn inward and remember that actually inside is where I get those needs and those yearnings fulfilled. That sense of connectedness to the larger whole, that sense of oneness, which you normally love from someone else, but I can find that sense of oneness, that sense of wholeness, that sense of completeness, that sense of value, that sense of love on the inside. So that's been, and it took a little while because, I really wish it would have just worked out without any issue by finding a perfect
Absolutely.
partner, but it hasn't
Mhm.
happened yet. Alexandra, if you know someone, send them my way.
You know,
And
my wheels are
till that
turning.
time happens, I just really realizing that, well, actually, the yearning is valid. The
Yes.
yearning is sacred.
Yes.
We need to honor it. But we don't want to give ourselves away and pretend that that yearning can only be met from the outside. In fact, it can be met most powerfully from the inside. And then if you do find someone, it's like you share that fulfillment with someone else as opposed to turning toward them for that fulfillment. And so that's something that I've just been really focusing on the last couple of years. So.
I really appreciate you sharing that with us. I think it's one of the most difficult both ands or dialectics in this space is that desire to have connection with other and knowing that what we yearn for from somebody else, we can also give to ourselves. That both, I like that you're naming that both things are true. You are not foolish for saying you're not foolish or silly or dependent or needy for saying that you yearn for that kind of connection with somebody else. And at the same time, you're holding an awareness that you don't need to wait for somebody else.
Yeah, exactly. If I'm looking for love, I need to look for love in the right place, and that's my connection. And when I say myself, I don't mean like my separate self. I mean like myself that is one with the universe. So you might also say it's outside of me, but not in terms of particular relationships or
Oh,
particular events.
yeah.
It's kind of like you go inside and realize that you are part of this larger universe, if that makes sense. It's not like the small self, Kristen. It's the big self, Kristen, you might say. My larger self, my spiritual self, my whole self, my being with a capital B.
Yes.
Yeah.
That you are both the wave and the ocean, that you are a
Yes.
part.
Yes. It's like this wave wanting to go home and realizing, hey, little wave, you're already the ocean. That's really what I'm talking about.
You're
Yeah.
there right now. You're there right now,
Yes.
right now.
Yes.
Oh. That is my understanding of your journey into the self-compassion work is that it was your connection to spirituality as a grad student, right? That took you, I was going to say from psychology to spirituality, but they've never been, we acted like they were separate, but they never really were separate. So can you talk to us about that connection between your role as a social scientist and a spiritual practitioner?
Yeah. So if I'm going to be totally honest, it's probably primarily spiritual for me. I was a very spiritual child. I had, new age parents. I grew up in California, and I first learned about self compassion when I was exploring Buddhism. The root for me always was finding this deeper meaning, this larger love, this sense of being home and whole and healed. And then at the same time that so I actually found out about self-compassion when first learning about Buddhism in the last year of graduate school. So I was already in academia. I was already in the academic route. I always loved science, but self-compassion was kind of separate, and self-compassion was more the spiritual realm. And then I had my scientific work, and I was interested. I was a developmental psychologist. But then when I started getting more interested in Buddhism and this question of, well, who are we really? And are we as separate as we think we are? I did 2 years of postdoctoral study with a woman who specialized in self-concept development. We started thinking, well, how is it that this idea of a separate self evolves? When does it evolve? How does it evolve? What shapes it? And then when I got my job at UT Austin, after a couple of years here, I was like, well, why don't we look at self-compassion scientifically. No one's really looked at it before. People have talked about it. I mean, therapists, it's really nothing new in therapy. It's kind of the foundation of therapy in many ways, but no one had really operationalized it or measured it or researched it. And so that's when I brought the two together, that I realized I could use the tools I learned as a scientist. And especially I was looking at like moral development and people's reasoning about things. I thought, well, I can look at how they relate to themselves as well. So, but for me, it's always been spiritual, and it really is spiritual. And now that I'm actually retired from academia, I'm not actively doing research anymore. My work is becoming more and more spiritual because that's really where it points. It points home. And for me, home is our connection to the larger whole.
Oh, that's really cool that we were lucky to have you as a scientist for as long as we did, but you're coming home now. You're coming back to your.
Yeah, science is great. It's wonderful. It's useful.
Yep.
But from my point of view, we've kind of already showed all its benefits. There's a few more interesting studies, but I think you don't really understand in detail how self-compassion works until you try it out for yourself. There's the concepts that kind of gets you through the door, but where the rubber meets the road is, okay, I'm upset, I'm hurting. What do I do right now in this moment? Reading the study that it reduces depression or anxiety or whatever, it's like, that may get you to putting your hand on your heart.
Yeah.
But what happens afterward is really what's key.
Yeah. Well, to your point that therapists have been talking about things that feel like and look like self-compassion for a very long time. But for you to articulate for us the three pillars that's essential because it really is one of those things that it feels hard to put your hands around and really operationalize. And so I know I was telling you before the show started that anybody who's been listening to Reimagining Love for more than a moment has heard me quote Kristin Neff and talk about the three pillars. And it is, I find that when I'm working, I often do these solo episodes where we're talking about one particular facet of difficulty in relationships, when shame blocks repair, dealing with breakup regret, these kinds of like dilemmas that people carry. And I offer perspectives on it. And nearly always when we move from understanding into interventions, self-compassion is one of the interventions that is there. So the diehards have heard the three pillars, but it's different to hear it coming right from you. So will you talk to us about what is self-compassion? What are these three pillars that make it up?
Yeah, and you might say it's like a three-legged stool. You really need all three to be stable. If you only have one or two, then it may kind of fall into something else if we aren't careful. So you might say the foundational pillar is mindfulness. I actually first learned about self-compassion when I was learning about mindfulness. There's a reason it requires mindfulness because mindfulness is the ability to turn toward and be aware of what's happening as it's happening. And when what's happening is suffering, and by the way, to kind of backtrack, why are we talking about suffering all the time? Well, it's built into the word compassion. Passion means suffering in Latin. How are we with suffering? And normally when suffering arises, especially our own, either we want to do two things. We want to pretend it's not there, like put our head in the sand, or we want to immediately make it go away and we fight it and we resist it and we end up usually just making things worse. So we need mindfulness to be able to say, hey, I'm really having a hard time right now, or this hurts, or this is difficult for me. So we need to be present with our own experience, even though it's painful, but in a balanced way, that also just doesn't just dive into it or doesn't get lost in it or exaggerate or catastrophize about it. This is really hard, but kind of just see it for what it is. So that's the first pillar. If there's no mindfulness, then you might be just lost in a drama, or you might say, oh, I'm compassionate and just like pretend it's not there. Like, oh, I put my hand on my heart so I don't
It's
have to
gone.
feel what I'm feeling.
Poof.
If there's no mindfulness, we can't heal what we can't feel, right? So you need to be able to feel it, and that's mindfulness that allows us to do that. And then we need to respond, with warmth and kindness. You might say my work followed on the heels of the mindfulness movement. It wouldn't have been accepted if there wasn't already so much research on mindfulness, and mindfulness hadn't already gotten so much widespread acceptance. But the reason people feel a little more comfortable with mindfulness is it's kind of vaguely mental or cognitive. I'll open my awareness, I'll be present with it. But they don't really talk about the heart necessarily. Some people do. But often it's just kind of like spacious awareness, but there's no warmth. And so when what you're aware of is painful, we feel scared, we feel frightened. So we need to give ourselves that sense of warmth, that sense of, I'm here for you, I care about you, how can I help? So that we feel safe enough to be present with what we're experiencing. And so the warmth is key. And I really found the warmth was missing, at least when I first started, in terms of how people were talking about using mindfulness to deal with difficulty. So it's warmth, it's supportive, it's caring, it's this sense of, wanting to help, it's goodwill, all those things that help us feel accepted, kind of unconditionally accepted is really key. And then the third element, I must say, I didn't realize at first that it had to be there until when it came to, I was writing my first paper, like, okay, I got to come up with a clear definition of self-compassion because I wanted to create a scale to measure it. So I was reading like all my books, Jack Kornfield's A Path with Heart, Sharon Salzberg's Loving Kindness, mainly people from the Insight tradition. But I read all the books on compassion I could get my hand on. And I was really focused on this question, what's the difference between self-compassion and self-pity? Because feeling sorry for yourself, you might say, well, my heart's open, I'm warm, I'm mindful, I'm aware that I'm suffering, but feeling sorry for yourself, why isn't that a good thing? And it's because, of course, when you feel sorry for yourself, you feel separate, you feel isolated. And also, especially remember coming from the more Buddhist perspective, which I was at the time, compassion, in order to really be understanding of someone, if they were hurting or they made a mistake, you need to understand all the causes and conditions that went into that action being taken or that mistake being made. Or so instead of saying, you are wrong, it's like, oh, I see that you were stressed and all this happened in your background. It's like, it's a type of wisdom that sees the bigger picture. Compassion recognizes context, causes and conditions. It is a wisdom. It's not just feeling sorry for someone. It's like seeing, oh, I see how complex this is. Blaming one individual harshly doesn't really make sense given the larger causes and conditions. And so that's when I realized I needed something in the definition that pointed to that larger whole. And I called it common humanity. I probably could have called it other things as well, maybe connectedness or interdependence or intervene. But the reason I chose the word common humanity is because that's the easiest thing to understand, that compassion is rooted in our humanity. To be human means to be flawed. The human experience means struggle. To be human does not mean to be perfect or to get it all right. And so when you remember that, oh yeah, this is part of the human experience. It's not just me. I'm not the only one who's ever felt this or struggled with this or experienced this. Then that kind of broadens the sense of self. So it's not so limited and isolated. And that's really key for tying everything together because if it's really, so I remember when I first came on the scene, a lot of my Buddhist friends were like, Kristen, aren't you making the problem worse? Self-compassion isn't self the problem. Really, I remember like Matthew Ricard for years. A lot of people like turned up their nose at self-compassion. They thought it was
It's so interesting.
yeah. And it's like what's really important to understand when you have, that's why you need the three pillars. When common humanity or that larger connectedness is here, you actually become less self-focused. Normally, when we're lost or identified with the suffering, or I'm so inadequate, or this is the worst thing in the world, and all that, we're very tied up with their sense of self. But we move into compassion. We move from being the small, separate, limited self that needs compassion into the larger, more connected, wiser, warmer, more loving self that gives compassion. And normally we're used to doing that for others. When you're feeling compassion for someone, you just naturally feel connected, you feel more capable, you feel more spacious. That's what's happening with self-compassion as well. That's why we need all three, otherwise it's a two-legged stool.
You did a great job of talking about what happens in the absence of any one of those three. And it's so interesting to hear you talk about the common humanity leg, which I'm thinking about. I've been teaching this class at Northwestern called Marriage 101. I've been teaching it for 25 years. So I didn't have you in my first few years of teaching it, but I've been teaching them self-compassion for many, many years. And when I talk through those three legs, it always almost brings tears to my eyes when I think about these students starting to understand the idea of common humanity for them is that there's actually nothing that they feel insecure about, confused about, frustrated about, that makes them different from anybody else in the classroom. I feel like, especially in those high stress, high achievement spaces, it's really easy for them to buy into the story that everyone else has it figured out except for me. And so that common humanity part, to me, is an antidote to shame. But as I hear you talk about it now, I'm hearing it as also a protection against self-pity, because that's the other way, right? Is a kind of self-pity that forgets that actually my suffering is part of a part of the larger suffering of all people, that it's an invitation to connect.
Yes, there's so many ways in which it's necessary that I'm not alone. Other people feel this too, an invitation to connect, and also wisdom. I mean, I think maybe I don't talk about this as much because it's a little more high level concept, but it's really important. What we do, how we act, 95% of what we do, our behavior is influenced by things totally we aren't even aware of, our subconscious processing, our gut biome, what we ate, the larger culture, our genes, our grandmother's genes, what happened to our grandmothers
Our blood
three,
sugar
three
level.
generations ago that's still expressed in my
Right.
DNA. I mean, really what's happening is so connected to so many things we normally don't think of as me. And so when you see that, that's when we can start to have understanding. Like, well, of course I reacted that way. Given all these conditions, is so again, we just take things a little less personally. And that's really huge for compassion when we take things a little less. It doesn't mean we don't take personal responsibility because this experience, it's only happening here. It's not your experience, it's my experience. So there's something we take personal responsibility. We might say it's my responsibility, but it's not my fault. I didn't choose to be in this position. Here I am. So don't, I have to take responsibility, but I don't have to blame myself for being here because it's linked to so many other things that are larger than me.
Yeah. My gosh, I feel like that is how I spend half my week with my couples in therapy, is inviting them to put their partner's behavior in a little larger context and to entertain the possibility that it is not such a direct personal attack, to contextualize. So that is a wisdom. And that's where you got your Buddhist colleagues back, right? Because that is a wisdom
Yes.
practice. That's a wisdom practice.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it took a while, but I think they're pretty much all on board now.
Yeah, you hung in there. You hung in there. Okay, so will you talk a little bit about where, for those of us who struggle with self-compassion, some of those origins are in our early experiences and our family system. So can you help us think a little bit about how our own self-critic, is informed by the experiences that we've had in our past?
Yeah, well, I'd actually, if you don't mind, like to talk about that, and also just the fact that there's something that's biological about the fact that we're so self-critical, because
Oh,
we don't want to put it all in the hands of our parents. We
we
don't
do
talk
not.
about that,
We do not.
but
No.
it's actually more natural from an evolutionary perspective for us to be self-critical as opposed to self-compassionate. And that's because it's in the context of suffering, whenever there's a suffering means there's a problem. Either I made a mistake, there's a problem, or something's happening in my life that's a problem. So when there's some sort of problem, we go into threat defense mode. There's a threat, there's a problem, fight, flight, or freeze. And so this is the first thing that comes up for us when we feel personally threatened, is we go into fight, flight, or freeze. But of course, when the problem is internal, we fight ourselves, we criticize ourselves, thinking somehow it's going to keep us safe if we get ourselves in line, or prevent so it won't hurt so bad other people's judgments if I do it to myself first. That's a
Yeah.
safety behavior. Or we flee into a sense of shame or isolation, or we freeze and get stuck. So when you criticize yourself, your sympathetic nervous system is activated. Your all the symptoms of cortisol, adrenaline, all that's happening because we feel threatened. When your best friend makes a mistake, you don't feel so personally threatened. So it's actually easier to use the second biological system, which is the care system, which is also a safety
To tend
system,
and befriend,
tend
right?
and
Tend and
befriend,
befriend.
but it
Mhm.
evolved for other people. It evolved for,
Mhm.
parents and offspring to bond, and also for in-group members. Sadly, not so much for out-group members. I wish it were the case, but nonetheless, for in-group members, tend and befriend, that's also natural, but it's not as instinctual for us. So part of this is just our physiology. Our nervous system gets activated when we feel threatened. So we go into fight, flight, or freeze. We criticize ourselves. Takes almost like a second step to remember, oh, yeah, I do have this other way of responding, the tend to befriend system, and we use that with ourselves. So part of it is that, system.
Yes.
Part of it is
Yes.
culture. How many of you were like, people were raised with the idea it's good to be self-compassionate? Not many. And then you add on top of that, family of origin. Was it modeled for you? Were your needs consistently met? Were you treated as if you were worthy of getting your needs met? Were people understanding and compassionate to you or not? And so that even adds an extra layer. So it's hard enough for everyone, but for some people, and by the way, it's not just if maybe your parents were critical of you directly. Sometimes they just really modeled that. Sometimes the
Yes.
parents weren't critical of you, but boy, they beat themselves up. And so you get the message, oh, that's the way to deal with it. Actually, if I beat myself up in front of you, I've learned, oh, that's the way to get people to like be nice to me then, so we get all these unconscious messages from our family of origin or early experiences that just even exacerbate it even further. So we come by the lack of self-compassion, honestly,
We sure do. We sure do.
don't
Yeah.
beat yourself up for beating yourself up.
That's right. That's right. That I know for me, that
Yeah.
was a big igniter of my self-compassion practices was when I became a mom and knowing that I really, even if I was comfortable being mean to myself inside of my own head, I knew that that was not the environment I wanted to create in our home because I wanted to model something different. So I think for a lot of us, we could be okay, being mean to ourselves indefinitely, but it is when we start to see how our own relationship with self affects the people around us that becomes the kind of side door into self-compassion.
Yeah. And what we know from the research is what you model and embody is the impact. Other people, if you're beating yourself up and you feel stressed and physiologically aroused, people are interacting with someone who's kind of tense and stressed. But if you embody self compassion, you feel secure, you feel loving, your heart's open. Other people model that. They get those vibes, so to speak. But, it's basically our mirror neurons are syncing with each other, and so we're impacting the people around us by what we cultivate
I
internally.
think that's such an important part.
People don't realize that. And
No.
then once they do, they start realizing, oh, I see, this is important.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Well, I have a question for you I have noticed that with clients as they begin to practice self-compassion, oftentimes one of the experiences they have is grief, the noticing of the contrast of how in shifting how they relate to themselves, it highlights all of the years that they went without. So can you talk a little about that kind of asterisk or that little heads up or warning about that impact of practicing self-compassion?
Yeah, there's actually a term we have for it, which we call it backdraft. And so backdraft are the kind of uncomfortable negative feelings that may come up when we first start to practice self-compassion. So some people think, self-compassion, I'm going to feel just immediately warm or loving and connected. Often what comes up is a grief, sometimes anger, sometimes fear, sometimes like traumatic memories. So there's a couple sayings we have around this. When you give yourself unconditional love, you almost immediately remember all the conditions under which you were unloved by yourself, by others. There could be a lot of grief there. Also, compassion reveals everything unlike itself. It's almost like contrast, like, oh, I haven't been doing this. I've been doing just the opposite. So that stark contrast, either again, how you've been treating yourself or how other people have been treating you, it could bring up a lot of pain. There's also the fact that, when you've had to close your heart just to survive, maybe you had a traumatic childhood, you had to numb yourself out, you had to close down your heart because it wasn't safe to have it open. And then self-compassion is a way of starting to open your heart. And it's like a house on fire. They don't just fling open the doors of the house because if you do, the air rushes in and the flames rush out. That's backdraft. And it can feel like that with self-compassion practice. We open our heart, the fresh air of the love and acceptance rushes in, and all the old pain that we've been defending ourselves against comes rushing out. So the important thing to remember is it's natural. It's actually a good sign. If you would just remain closed and your heart was, tight, shut tight, you wouldn't feel backdraft. You also wouldn't get any benefit from the practice. So it means your heart's starting to open. The pain needs to be released in order to be healed, right? It's in your body, so it needs to be felt, it needs to be experienced. But it also means you need to go a little more slowly. You need to ask yourself, how deep do I want to go? You can titrate. how much self-compassion you give yourself, how much pain you open to in a way that feels safe and measured and, going at a pace that feels right for you. We say, walk slowly, go farther. You don't have to like open to it all. You can just like, what's there? Ooh, that hurts. Oh, a little bit of the residue for a while, then maybe
Yeah.
when we feel safer, get a little deeper.
That's really important too for folks with a trauma history, because anytime you get to feel like you are in the driver's seat of any part of your healing, of your experience, of your life, like that is so important. That is where so much healing happens.
Safety is the foundation of self-compassion. So self-compassion helps you feel safe in general because you feel you've got your own back, you're going to support you, you're going to ask yourself, what do I need? And you have to make sure that you also are practicing self-compassion safely. Because of backdraft, you don't feel safe, well, then you're no longer practicing self-compassion. So you need, how can I do this in a way that feels safe, at a pace that feels safe, in a context that feels safe? That's really key. You value your own safety, you value your own well-being, and how you approach it needs to be consistent with that.
So there can be self-compassion in the pausing, in the slowing down.
Absolutely. We like to tell people, like in our retreats, Chris Germer and I, we'd say, if you walk out of here mid meditation because it's too much, we're going to be clapping for you, because that means you're taking your own needs seriously. Right. You're caring for yourself by saying, well, it's a bit too much for me right now.
That's great. Okay, I have one more question about self, and then I want to cross over the bridge and talk about how self-compassion plays out in specifically romantic relationships. But I'm going to ask, this is just a question for a friend, not for me. Can we be ambitious and driven and self-compassionate?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So my last book, actually, I'm not promoting it, but it happens to be on my desk because the paperback's coming out and I'm revising it. Fear, self-compassion. So fear, self-compassion. So there's two basic forms of compassion. What I call tender self-compassion, which is more about the acceptance. We accept ourselves, flaws and all. We accept the fact that, there's some things we can't change in our lives, some circumstances. It's the power of warmth and acceptance. But fierce self-compassion is the power of action. If we're going to care about ourselves, that means we're going to ask ourselves, well, what are my goals? What helps me be fulfilled? What dreams do I want to achieve? So if fierce self-compassion motivates us to reach our goals, it can mean being ambitious, to meet our own needs, to say, what do I need? What do I care about? Instead of just accepting what society says I should need and care about. And then also protection, drawing boundaries, saying no. So it's kind of like saying no when we need to say no to other people or situations, but also saying yes when we need to say yes to our ambitions, to our drives, to the things we need to change. So absolutely, we need both. If it's just about acceptance, then we might become complacent, and that's not going to help. But if we're all about making change and there's no acceptance of the fact that, hey, we're human beings and, and sometimes our emotions, that, it's just what is, then we get exhausted or over striving. So it's really this balance of always fierce and tender self-compassion, like yin and yang. They need to go hand in hand.
What I'm hearing you say is that when we are ambitious from a place of fierce self-compassion, we're really clear to how I'm striving for this goal because it ties to something that lights me up, rather than because the world says it's important, or if I do this, I'll be perceived in a particular way. So it's like an internal fire.
Or I will be, because I want to be worthy. It also can come from outside. It can also come from inside. So what's the difference between self-esteem and self-compassion? I mean, it's a big theme of mine. Self-esteem is a judgment or an evaluation of worth. And for most people, they base their self-esteem on achievement. It could be an achievement like, academically or professionally, or, if you're an athlete, reaching your goals, whatever you care about, or maybe even in a relationship. So the self-worth of self-compassion is unconditional because it's based simply on being a flawed human being, right? You don't have to earn it. You don't have to have success to get it. Actually, it's most relevant when you fail, but it's always relevant. It's unconditional. It's based in our intrinsic flawed humanity. And so therefore, if you're trying to achieve a goal in order to feel good about yourself or to feel worthy, then you're really doing is what's called a performance orientation. And with self-compassion, it's more of a learning orientation. In other words, I'm already worthy. Whether or not I reach my goal, I'm worthy regardless. But I want to reach my goal because this is important to me. It lights me up. I care about it, or I want to do my best. And for people who are really ambitious, for instance, we teach this to athletes. We did a study with, college level athletes. They thought, I need to be hard on myself. Second best is not good enough. I need to be number one. So self-compassion doesn't mean that, second best is good enough. Maybe you still want to be number one. The important thing is if your performance falls short, you make a mistake, you lose that game or that tournament, your worth is taken out of the picture. Because if your worth is in the picture, then you're going to spend so much time like being anxious. And what does it say about me? And you see athletes, they go in this downward spiral when they take it personally.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like, says nothing about me, but what can I learn from this?
Yeah.
And the more you can learn from your mistakes, it's a truism, but it's true.
Mm-hmm.
Failure is your best teacher.
Right.
So when your sense of worth is taken out of the picture, you're actually more likely to achieve your goals. And that's what we found. It actually helped athletic performance, the more self-compassion you have.
That is so cool. That's so cool.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Because you're less anxious and you're more able to learn from your mistakes, and setbacks and failures are like learning experiences. And then it's easier to say, okay, that didn't work. Let me try this.
Your wholeness is in no way enhanced or diminished by the outcome.
That's right. But it doesn't mean you don't care about the outcome.
Yeah.
But the reasons you care
are
more the reason you care is not anything that says about you. You care just intrinsically because you did be in this sport, or it's really important to you, or you value it. It kind of comes in the right places. You aren't hanging your self-esteem or your sense of self-worth on achieving that goal. And that takes the anxiety out of the picture. It allows you, you're in a better emotional place to do your best. It's more easy to get into a flow state, for instance, which is when you do your best. And I could talk about the physiology of that, but when you're in a flow state, you aren't thinking about yourself. Athletes or whoever you are, you do your best in your flow state, which means you are just in it. You aren't thinking about yourself. You're just focused on the task at hand. You're fully absorbed. That's when we perform our best. When we're thinking, what does this say about me? Or what that person, they're doing it better. Or, it's not like, what can I learn from that person? But, I feel badly about myself because I'm not as successful. All that takes us away from our game and actually makes it harder to succeed.
How wonderful that not only does it make the experience feel better, it actually has been found to improve your performance. So that's just like, it's like a win-win.
Athletes or people, leaders, people in the work environment. It puts you in the better emotional state, better mind state to actually achieve the most. And really important to learn the most. It puts us in a state where you can actually have learning goals, a growth orientation as opposed to performance.
Okay, well, that's the perfect bridge to the world of intimate relationships, because it feels so clear to me that self-compassion and intimacy are inextricably bound, especially around conflict and relational rupture. That if I can't be compassionate with myself when my partner is frustrated with me or disappointed in me, I cannot make repair, because all I'm doing is fighting to shore up my sense of worth, to prove something to him. But I want to hear you talk to us about what do we know about the connection between this practice, the self-compassion practice is one that we have with ourselves, but it's so tied to our relationships, and here specifically our intimate relationships.
Yeah. And of course, I've done research on it, and other people have done research on it. So we have data that shows that without a shadow of a doubt, that the more self-compassionate you are, the better relationships you have. And by the way, it's not only that you think your relationships are better, the your relationship partners also judge it to be better. So you measured it independently to make sure there's not self-report bias. And it makes sense. So if you're looking for your partner to meet all your needs, to make you feel whole, to meet your needs for approval, to meet your needs for happiness, or whatever it is you're looking for, then when they don't, if you're putting all your eggs in their basket, so to speak, then when they don't meet your needs, you're going to be upset about it, right? The other thing that happens is it makes you're less able to be authentic in a relationship, because if it's contingent, right? If your worth stems from their approval, well, then you're going to start doing things to make them happier, what you think they want. You're not going to be your authentic self. You're going to start changing your behavior. And the lack of authenticity reduces your capacity for intimacy. And so what we find in again, my research, other people's research, is that when you have self-compassion, so in other words, you can reach some of your own needs for love, for acceptance, for approval, for, interest, for taking care of yourself internally. What that does is it allows you to be more authentic. It allows you to be more intimate. It allows you, for instance, when there's a conflict in the relationship, to think of compromise solutions that, it's not like my way or the highway, but you're not going to just like subordinate yourself or say, okay, whatever you want, darling, it's
Yeah.
fine,
Yeah. Yeah.
which also makes for less like you aren't even fully in the game. And so it's very, very good for allowing for intimate, authentic relationships.
Mm. You found some gender differences in self-compassion, that women in general score lower on measures of self-compassion than men.
Yeah. So it's interesting. It's small, but it's consistent.
Okay.
And it's not so much, you shouldn't think of it as much like, oh, men are so self compassionate and they're really being kind to themselves. It's more that women are trained that their needs are less important. So what we see is that women in general are more compassionate to others than men are, and they're less self-compassionate by a little bit. And again, by the way, this is not biological sex or even gender identity. It's really socialization. When we do research that takes into account gender role ideas, like gender role socialization, the effects wash out. But it's people who really bought into the idea of a traditional woman or female, someone who always meets someone's needs, who's giving, who's self-sacrificing, then they tend to be less likely to meet their own needs. They feel they don't really deserve it. They should always focus on meeting other people's needs. And really, in many ways, what self-compassion is asking, what do I need, and giving it to yourself. So that's part of it. There's also a little part of it, I think we can't forget that anyone who has less power, if you have less power in society or in a relationship, we tend to use kind of self-criticism as a way to, when we feel we can't even act for ourselves, and we kind of have to accept our lot in life, so to speak. And self-criticism is one way that women have been trained to do that. And they might feel a little more threatened as well, which might, someone might be really mad at me if I speak up. Okay, I'll just do what they say or what I'm supposed to do because it's too frightening not to do it. So I think power plays a role traditionally. Again, there's lots of individual differences. But really, I think it's just the fact that women have been socialized that their worth comes from meeting others' needs, and it's selfish to meet their own needs.
Yes.
Having said that, 85% of the people that show up to my workshops are women because women are it's acceptable to use compassion as a means of maybe, self-growth. Whereas I think it's not part of the traditional male gender role. So they maybe feel a little more uncomfortable with it.
Yes. Yeah. I definitely, when I'm working with a straight couple, the way that I language self-compassion work, it's a little bit, yeah, it's just, I am aware of the way that the language lands for men, especially men who kind of have more traditional gender notions. But I see it. I can see, I'd like you to speak to this. I can see how oftentimes what their partners code as defensiveness, he's so defensive. To me, it feels like it is a reflection of the struggle with self-compassion, right? It's like, I need you to actually understand me and see my goodness and see why I did it that way and see why there's a justification. And that is coming from a place of, I don't know how to give that to myself.
Yeah, no, I could see that for sure. I also find this difference between fierce and tender self-compassion. Women are a little more comfortable with the tender self-compassion. A lot of men were like bullied or called names when they were little if they were too sensitive. Imagine that. They were traumatized. And so they have all these defenses up against anything that seems too soft because someone might actually beat them up or tease them. Think about that. But they may be more comfortable with fierceness. So, for instance, like I taught a UT men's Longhorn basketball team. The coach asked me to give them a session on self-compassion. I didn't even call it self-compassion. I called it inner strength training. So it really is. It's about inner strength, about being there for yourself.
Yeah.
Having and
Yeah.
being that kind of. You can think of the traditional male role of being a protector, or provider. That's more of that fierce self-compassion role, and so that can be a way in for men or people who've been socialized that way.
Oh, that's really nice. That's a really nice way to get to the same end point and to really kind of like work with the very real, like the men that struggle with the idea of softness, they come by that. They come by that, pain of socialization or trauma of socialization. They come by that honestly. And so you have found a way to kind of work with it.
Yeah. Although they still need the acceptance. So, but the doorway in may be the fears, but if there's no acceptance of like, sometimes you can't change everything. Pain is here. You can't change that. And unconditional self-acceptance doesn't come from the achievement, that it's like prior to the achievement. So it needs a little work. And for women, a lot of women need a little help with the fierceness. They were raised that they can't get angry or they can't be too pushy or assertive. Drawing boundaries can be really hard for a lot of women if they're taught that it's not nice, things like that. So everyone has their own ways, parts of self-compassion that are more of a struggle than others. So, everyone's different. And some people need to go left, some people need to go right.
Yeah. But you end up in the same good spot.
That's right. You want to be centered and balanced. Yeah.
Yeah. Before I let you go, will you give us a little window into what your favorite self-compassion practice is? Or is there one that you always go back to or feels tried and true, or that feels like a good place for somebody to start if this is new for them?
Yeah, well, there are two main ones, but probably the most basic way to give yourself self-compassion, the easiest, is through touch, because you kind of bypass the mind. Maybe your mind is like you're thinking about, oh my God, I can't believe I said that or whatever. But your body is like, it's more here, it's grounded. So because of the fact that we're mammals and physical touch is the primary way that care was communicated to us before we got language, working directly with the nervous system is kind of the easiest, the foundational thing. So putting your hands on your heart or your face or some sort of touch so that you can physically feel your own presence and support, and actually works through the vagus nerve and other things. So you calm your physiology down. And then you just say a few words of kindness. You can take what I call a self-compassion break, which means just being aware that, yeah, this is hard, mindfulness. Part of life. I'm not alone, common humanity, and some words of kindness, like I'm here for you, or, I'm so sorry you're going through this, or what do you need? There was a study that came out of UC Berkeley that showed 20 seconds a day of some touch and of some few kind words is all you really need to significantly increase in self-compassion. It doesn't have to be like an hour-long meditation unless you want to. Just a few moments, just training your brain that, oh yeah, I can support myself. So physical touch and maybe just some sort of language that's supportive and kind.
Beautiful. This went way too quickly. I could just sit here for another hour to 2 hours. Thank you so much. Will you, if this is somebody's first introduction to you besides through me, where can they go next? Where's the best place to continue learning with you and from you?
Yeah. So if you go to my website, selfcompassion.org, or if you just Google self-compassion, I got in early, so it'll lead to me. And then I've got, free practices, videos, exercises. I've got 5 books out now. Is that right? Yeah, I think I have 5 books out. Wow, it's crazy. And I also have something called the Self-Compassion Community, where if you want live events with me, we've got mentors. If you want a little more help and support, it's very inexpensive. You can be part of this larger community of people really intentionally practicing self-compassion. So, but my website is the place to start and find all that information.
Wonderful. And I'm so excited that your Fierce Self-Compassion is coming out in paperback.
Yeah. What's interesting is my hardback was aimed at women. I had actually written it during the Me Too movement. I was like, wanted to write it for women. And the paperback is more gender neutral because I had so many men say, wow, I need this too, Kristen. Will you please write it for all of us? So I changed it. So now it's just for everyone on how to use the tools of fierce self-compassion and balance them with the tender.
That's great. All right. Well, all of that is in the show notes. Thank you, Kristen, for being here.
Thank you. It's been fun.
Thank you, Kristen, for that illuminating conversation. Okay, if this conversation did not sell you on the benefits of self-compassion, I don't know what will. Self-compassion is an essential ingredient to move through the most difficult parts of life with more resilience and to lean more deeply into the brightest parts and feel more joy. It is scientifically proven to reduce depression and anxiety, broadens our sense of self, connects us to the larger whole. It helps us take things less personally, show up more fully, more authentically in our important relationships. I mean, what's not to love? So I invite you to add self-compassion to your toolkit and see its benefits for yourself. To learn more about Dr. Kristen Neff, including her books that can help you get started with your own self-compassion practice, you're going to find links to all of that in the show notes. Until next time, be well. Do you have a relationship question that you want answered on the show? Visit reimagininglove.com to send in a written or audio question. Questions can be about intimate partnerships, family relationships, friendships, you name it. If you're looking for more love and relationship content, you can find me on Instagram at dr.alexandra.solomon or visit my website, dralexandrasolomon.com, where you'll find my blog as well as the Intimate Relationships 101 e-course based off of the popular class I teach at Northwestern University. Thank you for listening and see you next week here on Reimagining Love.